Month event, which we have worked very closely with the University of Bristol, which is absolutely fantastic. Often with two universities in the same cities, it's notorious that we are rivalries, but I deeply believe that on issues of equality, diversity and inclusion is probably the one place that we can really join together and join forces. So it is absolutely is really exciting that have been able to do that. Today we'll be welcoming a really great set of speakers, which personally I'm really proud of for the diversity, for the richness, for the just different experiences, and I really hope that you'll get as much out of today as we intend you to have. In terms of general housekeeping, there's no fire alarms due today. There might be a few more technical hiccups, but please be patient with us as we ride through the wave together. The layout of the event is going to be 45 minutes for questions, 45 minutes for the panel, 30 minutes for questions. And because this is a collaborative event between UWE Bristol and the University of Bristol, we're really pleased to have two of the executives from retrospective universities to say a few words to kind of welcome and start our event. So it is my great pleasure to firstly welcome Robert Kersey, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the University of Bristol. As we are the official host of the event, it is a good thing to pass to our counterparts first, and then we'll go to our own. So Robert, if you would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Louise. That's really kind of you. Good afternoon, everyone. LGBT plus History Month just gives us a fantastic opportunity in what's a really, really challenging time, just to take a few minutes just to recognise ourselves as LGBT plus individuals, all those people who've gone before us, the brave things that they've done, the imaginative things that they've done in order to create a more equal and inclusive environment for us. But there is still a lot of work to be done to make sure that all LGBT plus people feel like they do receive equal treatment, including within our own institutions, which are generally perhaps more inclusive places to be LGBT plus than a lot of other companies and organisations. I think we've got a huge amount to do to thank our supporters for what they've done for the LGBT plus community. But let's just encourage everybody just to take some time aside this month, even if it's sort of 10 minutes to dip into an event, just to be inspired by what others have done to create a more equal and inclusive society, because it can give us inspiration as to how we can make a difference for those around us, including people from other minority groups, in order to create a more equal and inclusive world going forwards.
Thank you so much, Robert, for that. It's really great, and even just alone to have the University of Bristol with us today, I think is a really great sign of just incredible collaborative work, especially on a topic as important as this one. I am now going to pass over to Martin, and Martin is UWE Bristol's Martin is UWE Bristol's Pro Vice-Chancellor Research and Enterprise. I am going to change, if bear a second, and then pass the floor to Martin. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Louise. I was going to say I'll make a start. And thank you, Robert, a colleague of mine from the University of Bristol. We normally meet when we're talking about things financial or operational. So great to see you here on this important 1st of February, first day of the LGBT plus History Week on mind, body and soul, which is just seems highly appropriate given what we've been through for the last few months. A very, very appropriate focus. Louise, you talked about rivalries between universities. I have to confess, I spent 20 years at the University of Bristol before coming to University of the West of England, so I'm doubly pleased, therefore, to be welcoming colleagues and students and from both universities, where I've spent most of my life. So thank you very much for inviting me. Welcome to you all for the this official launch. As Louise said, I rejoice in the grand title of Pro Vice-Chancellor for Research and Enterprise, but I'm also a member of UWE's Directorate, which is the body of senior folk, we'll call them, within the university who work with Steve West as Vice-Chancellor. We do have our own areas of specialism, if you like. So we have a finance director, we have Joe Midgley, who looks after student experience. I won't go through all of us. There's only 6 of us. But we also have collective responsibility for policy and many things within the university. And one of those areas that we have collective responsibility is the whole area of equalities and diversity. So as a member of the Directorate, I have a collective, and I take on board a collective responsibility for issues around equalities and diversity in relation to LGBT plus, but also obviously people from ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, gender issues, and the way in which these all come together, which Robert hinted at, the complexities, the additional complexities that brings, and the challenges, but also the opportunities for us as a university. I should say that we have now, just recently, some of you will know, appointed Paul Olomile, who was head of our Faculty of Environment and Technology. He is now Pro Vice-Chancellor with responsibility for equalities, diversity, and integration, and inclusion, rather. So we do have a high-profile senior member of the university who has that responsibility in his very title. But as I say, he's sort of now the first among equals in terms of our responsibility. I think if you were to ask, well, what are the responsibilities of the Directorate? What's the responsibilities of the leadership of the universities? And again, Robert said this very eloquently. I think it's above all to ensure that as a university we are a safe, welcoming and fun place for people to work and to study, whatever their backgrounds. I think that's it. Above all, for our staff, it's about their working lives, from the way in which they're recruited, the way in which they have opportunities to develop their careers. That's hugely important. For our students, it's ensuring or making our best efforts to avoid gaps in opportunity or potentially outcome, which do result, to be frank, from differences, whether that be in relation to ethnic minority status or LGBT. We know, for example, we look very closely at our employee survey, and we know that our employees who are from an LGBT background report higher levels of bullying, levels of harassment, and so forth. So as well as the safe, welcoming, fun place, it's absolutely our responsibility to challenge any form of harassment, aggression, as experienced by colleagues and by students. So it comes out in terms of things like policies, in terms of supporting networks, making sure that we have information from things like our employer survey. But it does all boil down to exactly as Robert was saying, ensuring an equitable experience for all of our colleagues. I was just thinking that the point of History Week, obviously History Month rather, is obviously it's to look back in order to look forward, it's to learn the lessons of the past. I'm guessing I've probably got more history than, well, certainly most people I can see on the screen, and my history going back to my university days. I mean, I actually went to Cambridge University, where I did both undergrad and PhD and so forth. And looking back, I mean, this was I confess it was just the 70s and early 80s, and the world was very different then in all sorts of ways. I think we had a bit of a charmed life at the time. As Robert said, universities in general are hopefully a bit more liberal and welcoming than some communities or some of life outside of the universities. But let's not kid ourselves too much on that point. But certainly, in my student experience, it was a fairly charmed life. I lived for several years when I was a postgraduate in a household which was I was a minority as somebody who's not in the LGBT plus category. I was a minority in the house for several years. I was at the same college as Ian McKellen, who's something of an icon and always been a hero of mine for all sorts of reasons. But if we look back over that length of history, so much has changed. The internet hadn't been invented and didn't come along for quite a while, and that has changed so much for the good and so much for the bad as well. So much for the good in terms of the way in which people in communities can be established in an online way, the very fact that we can meet like this, but also the bad in terms of the vicious harassment that anybody who can be picked on because of their particular characteristics, Marcus Rashford, or people from an LGBT plus background. So that is one of the areas in which things have changed absolutely radically. That's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. I'm delighted that we are launching the History Month, and we will be looking back, but also I know looking forwards. I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion, which we're about to have, and I will dip into other activities over the next little while as well. So great to see you all. Thank you very much for the invitation, and really pleased to be here with both universities. Back to you, Louise.
Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you so much to both Martin and Robert for your introductions. I am now going to pass on to Alan. Alan is the chair of the UWE Bristol LGBT Staff Network, and he is chairing today's session and will be doing the conversations and the talks with our excellent set of speakers. So Alan, over to you, and everyone else, I hope you enjoy today and that you do join us on conversation on UWE Equality on Twitter to share the work, share this event, and get involved with the rest of the programme that I'll post on the chat. But passing over to Alan. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Louise. Hi everyone, as Louise said, I'm Alan. I use he and him pronouns. I'm going to go around now and ask the panelists to introduce themselves. We're all very grateful that they could take time out of their busy schedules to be here today. We're all very excited. If I could start with you, Yassine, if you could just introduce yourself.
Hiya, I'm Yassine, pronoun she, her, and I'm a diversity and inclusion specialist. My company, Confronting Change, focuses on LGBT inclusion, building race equity practices into organizational and company structure, and building diversity and inclusion strategies.
Oh, that's great. Kaz, if you could introduce yourself next. You're a little bit quiet, sorry, Kaz.
My name's Kaz. I'm representing Transport Southwest today. I'm she, her pronouns, so a chartered engineer, and I'm a trustee from a mental health charity as well.
Oh, that's great, thank you. Myles, if you could introduce yourself next.
Yeah, sure. I'm Myles, pronouns he, him. I'm also here, well, I'm here in a few different hats, I think. So I'm one of the core members of Kiki Bristol, an organisation, a collective in the city that sort of platforms and sort of is there to support the experience of queer, trans and intersex people of colour across the city and beyond. I'm also the Vice-Chancellor's Fellow for Young People's Mental Health at the University of Bristol. So again, kind of bringing together the universities. And I'm the lead for wellbeing in the Bristol Medical School Anti-Racism Task Force.
Yeah. And Tamsila, if you could introduce yourself next.
Yeah, I'm currently a materials engineering technician at UE. But what's relevant probably more for today's conversation is I worked in the NGO sector as an employee and trustee with organisations like SAFRA Project, which was a research and policy organisation for queer Muslim women. And more recently, I'm trustee of, or former trustee of Inclusive Mosque Initiative, which is welcoming to all genders, sexualities, disabilities, etc. I've had professional roles, just not in education or the NGO sector, but also in policy and research. And I am a member of my local trade union branch and a trade union activist.
Oh, that's great, thank you. So as you can see, we've got quite a diverse panel here today, so we're all really excited at all the different ideas that you might bring to the conversation. So a really nice, easy way to start, and I'll probably go in the same order that I did last time, was how are you today, and what has brought you joy recently, Yassine?
Yeah, I'm not too bad considering it's a dreary Monday afternoon. But yeah, I've got an exciting week ahead with work. And what's brought me joy is that my Christmas present from my girlfriend finally arrived, only 1 month late. And it was a selection of like truffle oils and truffles, which is very exciting.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent, very fancy.
Yeah, that's nice.
Excellent. What about you, Kaz? What's how are you doing today, and what have you what's brought you joy recently?
I'm feeling very good, actually. Really pleased.
You're very quiet again, sorry, Kaz.
Really pleased to be joining this event. What brought me joy just recently was on Saturday I had my COVID vaccine. Feeling really good about that.
Oh, excellent. Sorry. How about you, Myles? How are you doing today? What's been good in your life recently?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, thanks. It's the beginning of the week, so energy levels are on the higher side, which is nice. What's brought me joy recently? I had a really nice walk in the snow on Sunday. That was nice. It felt magical, felt a little bit like I was elsewhere, which helps from time to time.
Oh, excellent. No, it's lovely. Yes, I was hoping it was going to stick, but it didn't, sadly. I was very disappointed when it was all wet and windy this morning. And finally, Tamsila, how about you? What's brought you joy recently, and how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thanks. I had a lot more time with my youngest, which is great. So, especially with lockdown, I've been having more days with him, and that's fantastic, having more time with a toddler.
Oh, excellent. Also exciting. Wonderful. Right then, so we'll move on to our first question, and you'll have to forgive me if I read it off the computer. I couldn't memorize it all. So to the panel, obviously language within the LGBT plus community has changed and evolved over time. What has been your experience of this, such as the word queer used for empowerment versus derogatively? And that's to the panel.
Well, I'm certainly of an age where I remember queer being used in a derogatory manner.
I'm terribly sorry, Kaz. You're really very quiet again. I can't hear you very well.
I'm saying that I'm of an age where I understand queer as being used in a derogatory manner. I see it being sort of reappropriated by the younger community. it's something that I have to re-educate myself on. But I think it's great that it's been reclaimed. I think it's a really good term to be using.
How about everyone else? What's been your experiences with the language that's evolved over time, especially with the word queer?
For me, I remember a time like Kaz when queer was definitely a derogatory term. When we co-founded Sappho Project nearly 2 decades ago, it was hardly used. It was not a popular word. But then in the last decade, so I co-founded Inclusive Mosque nearly 10 years ago, and it's definitely a lot more acceptable, certainly amongst our younger members. It's a very popular word, it's a common word, and I've got more used to it and more comfortable with it, so I'm okay with it now. But it used to be a word I used to hate. So yeah, it's definitely changed over time.
I would say that when I was kind of coming to terms and understanding my own sexuality and gender, that the language was quite limited, and it feels like there's all these new terms that are coming up, but to explain feelings that have existed for over history. And I just think it's quite exciting to be able to have and to explore ourselves through language, and to understand what labels and things like that mean to us individually, and the fact that they don't have to mean one kind of set solid thing, but at the same time it kind of, you can find community within language and within identifying with people who kind of want to share those labels in that language. And I think that what you said about the empowerment in reclaiming terminology is so incredibly important, in taking back terms that were used to be to diminish your humanity and diminish your existence. And I think there's something just so powerful in that, and kind of in saying, I'm going to use this language before you can try and use it and weaponize it against me, and actually to make it into something that is something that I'm proud of, something that is a celebration of my identity, and to kind of, to change the meaning behind it. And so it's not a weapon anymore, it's something beautiful.
Oh, sorry, Alan, you're muted.
I know, it's not difficult, is it? But every time I'm like, oh, blah, 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 blah.
I wondered if I could,
on.
yeah, I wondered if I could briefly come in, because I mean, just to echo what I think everyone has said, there's real power in reclaiming a word with, historically so much venom behind it. But I suppose it's also interesting at a personal level, because it's still a word that, even within the last 12 months might still and has still been thrown at me from, vans driving down the street. So I think as much as we do gain power from that process of reclaiming the term, I think for a lot of queer people there's still the dual experience of it still being used by some people potentially outside of the community to cause pain. So I think there's the light in the shade for sure.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, that's brilliant. So moving on to the next question, I'm sure we all saw the protests for Black Lives Matter last summer, and obviously the removal of the Colston statue. So we wondered, obviously, with the Black Lives Matter movement, how has this shaped the discourse around equality, including the LGBT community, and how has this impacted us here in the UK, especially through the lens of intersectionality?
I'm happy to respond.
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, maybe that silence is just in and of itself quite indicative. It's such a big topic. It's such a it's difficult to speak about a topic like it without any emotionality. Like, it's particularly when it's not an abstract thing where it's something that intersects with your life. and the lives of people that you know and love. In terms of like how it lands with me, I think, you know, the discussion about Black Lives Matter needing to be about all Black lives. So thinking about who within the community that historically hasn't been extended to, and what we need to do as a whole community to ensure that all Black lives matter is really important. I think it definitely highlights the fact that, you know, racism is something that exists not just in the States, but is, you know, a phenomena that is experienced by people across the globe, and it's important to keep in mind what you know what happens here, and how we can be more specific about addressing racism closer to home. Yeah, I think, I mean, it'd be great to hear from the panel, from other people, you know, how it sort of lands to them. But I think, you know, I think we have to focus on action. So what we're doing, what all of us are doing, not just people who in their own lives might be the victim of racism, but what is everyone doing to address social justices?
Yeah, if I can jump in there. I think it's kind of particularly within the LGBT community, and it's highlighted this idea that that because, you know, you might belong to a marginalized group, that you understand the oppressions of others and that you yourself cannot commit oppressions. But obviously that isn't the case. And obviously I think it's highlighted that when we within the LGBT community, so often when we kind of are speaking about that in a wider sense, it is really because of the nature of who has had platform previously, we're actually speaking about the white LGBT community. I think what's been highlighted in as a result of the protests is that actually, you know, there is a lot of racism that does exist within our communities, our LGBT communities, and what are meant to be kind of like these safe spaces. And a lot of people, I think, having this moment of like to reckon with that, reconcile that for themselves. And you know, it can be very difficult when you do think that you are quite a, you know, open, liberal, progressive person, to come to this understanding that, you know, you do have privileges, even though you are part of a marginalized or an oppressed group. And so I think that's kind of been a really like interesting and difficult struggle for a lot of the LGBT people and the non-POC LGBT people that I know. And yeah, like for me personally, it's sort of just been a massive kind of moment of just asking myself, you know, what am I going to do? And I think it kind of echoes what Myles was saying at the end about like, what are we all going to do? You know, there was this moment of when, the protests first began and all these conversations were floating around where I felt so utterly helpless and angry and lost and didn't know, you know, what I was going to do with all those emotions. And it's been just a really important point of kind of taking a moment back to stop and say, okay, you know, there is action, there are things that I want to do, there are I do have community around me, and a lot of that has been within not only the LGBT community, but very specifically within the POC LGBT community, who have all kind of come together and are sharing their experiences. And yeah, so I think it's just like finding that space as well within it, and finding that space to kind of explore myself and to find kind of what my purpose is out of it, and to share that with others who are like-minded, and feeling really, I think, galvanized right now towards actually making some change and making a difference.
Oh, that's great. Thank you both. Is there anything else anybody else would like to add?
I've felt a huge mix of emotions over the summer with everything that was happening on a personal and professional level. I felt that it was great that, you know, finally we had an opportunity to start talking about some issues that people say, oh no, this has been dealt with, we don't need to talk about this, but clearly we have to. And I think hearing queer people of colour's voices centred is really important. And I'd like to add that it's not just all queer people of colour voices that are necessarily aren't centred, but I think certain perspectives are more centred than others. So I'm very keen on having kind of leftist perspectives centred. And for me, the politics is super important. You know, we can see that, you know, we've had female prime minister that did nothing for really women. We've had people of colour in parliament, or queer people in parliament that haven't done anything for the queer community. So I felt that, you know, having voices come forward is important, but having leftist voices voices that mainstream everyone, not just privileged people, is super important for me. And I also felt the mix of emotions on a professional level quite evident. We had Black Lives Matter movement happening in Bristol quite strongly. It was on the national news. We had, universities like ours making statements. And in the same summer, my university is extending a degree apprenticeship program for Avon and Somerset Constabulary. So while we're talking about Black Lives Matter and the effect that police, how they affect our communities, at the same time, my university is, supporting, perpetuating a system of oppression, which is the police force. I felt and still feel really outraged by that and really angry by that. So I see that contradiction, and I am constantly disappointed in my own generation of queer people, an older generation that don't see that intersectionality. They can separate race on one side and sexuality on another, but don't see how they interconnect. And I feel more positive with the younger generation, to be honest. I feel they see it much more naturally. So I'm hopeful for the future. And yeah, I kind of hope for the future to be better than it has been for my generation. I wanted to put that in there.
No, that's great. Thank you. A lot to think about there, and obviously it affects everyone in different ways. Lots of different conversations. Like I've spoken with older family members who have said, well, all lives matter, and trying to explain to them that that's not what it means. It's that obviously white people we are privileged. We don't face the adversity that other minority groups do, and it's sparking that conversation and talking with people and getting them to think, oh, actually, yeah, I can see what you mean, that Black lives do matter. It's not the same where all lives matter. So thank you everyone for that. Obviously, with COVID-19 still being lurking in the background, we've moved to online meetings and online workspaces. How do we feel that this online move has affected our community? Do we feel that online meetings are more safe for our community? Are we face more adversity that we didn't expect before? What's sort of everyone's thoughts or experiences on this?
So I'll dive in. So prior to all this, I worked in a predominantly queer office space, and I realized I was incredibly fortunate in that, but it really was such a lifeline and became such an important part of like my community, my identity, my kind of exploration of my identity, and kind of when that was taken away because of COVID, and while there's been so many like efforts and things around that made to accommodate people and to keep in touch, and having like check-ins and coffee breaks and things like that online, there is just like that sense of community that you can't recreate, unfortunately. So I'm definitely feeling that loss, but also it's made me fully appreciate that I kind of had it to begin with, and I had that space, and how fortunate I was in that. But I also recognize that for a lot of people, there is, and obviously in the work that I do, I see it, like there's a lot of anxiety about being, queer in your workspace, if you're able to kind of be yourself, to fully express yourself within your workspace. And in some ways, there's maybe been a little bit of a reprieve to not have to kind of be in a space all the time where you are feeling maybe a bit uncomfortable or a bit like you can't truly be your whole self. So I kind of see multiple sides of this, and I think there's definitely, I think it's such an individualized issue, but I also hope that some of the lessons that workplaces are taking away in terms of like working remotely, working through via Zoom and things like that, and online platforms, and understanding, I think, people's different working methods is. I hope that's something that we can take away afterwards, and that it doesn't have to be this rigid, like, you have to go in every day and wear certain things. And I hope that, there's an opportunity in that, definitely, that, and we can change even when we're thinking about things like access and ability, and how we approach that in our kind of standardized working setups. I hope that's something that we can take away, and that it's been kind of raised maybe a little bit more. and at the same time, though, I recognize that people are, like, when you're having a call like this and you have your backgrounds and stuff, in a way you are inviting people into your space a little bit more than you might do normally. And yeah, I can, you know, for many people that is actually, like, there's a level of intrusiveness in that is kind of, I think a lot of people have had to reconcile and try and work out how that, whether that can be a good thing and a positive thing and you feel kind of closer to people, or whether it kind of presents another barrier where you're having to kind of, I don't know, hide elements of yourself even further in your own home, in your own space, which can probably be, I think, quite distressing. So yeah, there's multiple sides to it, I guess.
Yeah, so for me, online working has worked out okay with my team. I still feel respected. They seem to treat me well, and they use my pronouns, and so on. I work with a really excellent team. But I'm also very conscious that visibility matters, representation matters. The fact I'm working from home, means that I'm not in the workplace. My workplace is a male-dominated workplace with 3,000 people, and I'm very conscious that the LGBT plus community aren't maybe sort of advocating for themselves as they were able to do when we were able to go in person. You can run these online events and people will join in for sure, and that's great. But I do feel that in terms of the sort of progress that we were making in my own works employee resource group, it's not been a particularly good year. We're trying, but it's been really hard. And also in the personal space, again, these online events are really important to connect with people. But we used to go to our community places, our safe spaces, meet people in person, and that's not the same anymore. That's something that's really missing. So I think as mentioned, the pros and cons to the online space, good and bad.
Does anyone else feel like they want to add to those sentiments? Like I personally felt like, yeah, there are pros and cons to having an online world. Nope, that's fine. So moving on and touching kind of about the community that Yassine spoke about. Here at UWE we have an allies network, and we kind of wonder what everyone's thoughts were. What roles do allies have in elevating or amplifying voices and narratives within the LGBT movement? What small actions do you feel make the biggest difference in terms of allies?
Yeah, again, as a minority group, any group needs some allies to advocate for them. And one thing I'm really encouraged by in my workplace is that at a very high level, we have people standing up for us. And when we talk about bullying and harassment in the workplace, and this also applies to universities, you need people at the top level to basically be supportive. So on Friday, I joined what we called a reverse mentoring scheme, where members of our employee resource group have a one-to-one with somebody at a very high level. And I was talking to the global head of talent at Rolls-Royce. And I think he was actually quite fascinated by me, to be honest with you. He could have spent all. But it's really important that you have these conversations so that allies can kind of understand your perspective, and if they're allies of influence, they can then advocate for you. And I know for a fact that University of Bristol, University of West of England still have work to do to make trans people feel comfortable in those educational establishments.
Is there anything specifically you would like to see?
No, I know that at the University of Bristol in particular, that trans people in the past have suffered from transphobic incidents. And I think this really does tend to come from the top to kind of make it a safe culture. Any workplace or any environment, the culture of the establishment is driven really from top down. And there's only a limit. There's a limit to what employee resource groups can do. And the LGBT plus societies of universities can do. They really do need support from the top level.
No, that's very true. What about the rest of the panel? What sort of things would you like to see from like an allies network or just allies in general, like to try and help include the community?
I think oh, Tamsila, did you want to go first?
You go ahead.
So as it's just kind of front of mind now, I think there's something really important about just going away and doing the work. So instead of sometimes asking some of the people who are most likely to, to be most adversely impacted by racism or transphobia or homophobia or all of those things we're doing, I think, being able to go away and do your own reading. And I mean, I know the question is really about what small things, but I think that's kind of letting a lot of people off the hook a little bit. I think people need to go away and do their own research. I think people need to use Google. I think there's so much information out there, readily accessible, now portrayed in so many interesting ways. I mean, even just changing what you watch on TV, watching, ask who's being cast in this, who's writing this, where am I getting my information from, and actually thinking, what might be the impact of me only watching shows that have stories like mine. I think it involves going away and doing your own work and not always. I mean, in Kiki Bristol, we often get asked to come into organizations to talk and to do lots of different things. And sometimes, I mean, it sounds really basic what we recommend, but yeah, it really is about working out what within your own toolkit you can adapt or yeah, bring into play. I'm not sure whether that answered the question, but yeah, that's what came to mind.
I also wanted to add that I think allies have a huge power in whose voice they choose to amplify, whether it's straight allies or white LGBT plus allies to the queer people of color. You have a lot of power in whose voices you're amplifying, whose voice you get to platform, whose voice you get to promote, and those voices are really important. Like I said, I feel very strongly that those voices need to be that are working class voices, that are marginalized voices within our own communities, disabled, LGBT people voices aren't heard as much as they should be and could be. And so just kind of picking the easy option isn't necessarily the one that's going to make the most progress or invite more inclusion. It's, giving space and time and support to those voices, because if those voices haven't had a history of being given a platform, it's not as easy as those that have had. You don't have the experience of necessarily media interactions or putting together presentation. So I think thinking about things with more detail and looking at who's been given, we don't come from a level playing field, basically. I think that's really important. And I think that's kind of the key thing, is that you stand by these voices. These, allies should be standing by people rather than trying to direct who gets to, get promoted, who gets to get platformed, who gets to speak, and look out to see who's not being heard and are they representative of those communities. I think it's really important that the people who get supported, who have allies, are the ones that are embedded in communities, that are doing activism, that are doing the work, and not just talking, but actually doing things that make a difference. I'm from the Asian community. We have a long history of self-promoted leaders of our community that have no real activism within our communities, and that's been a long fight across the country to change that. I think the same for the LGBT community. We have people who self-promote but don't necessarily have the embedded work in our own communities, and that's an ongoing challenge we have to kind of address. I'm very keen on that.
Yeah, and if I can contribute, I mean, allies are obviously like hugely important, because there are, we're, by the nature of things, there are smaller numbers of us, and so you need that kind of external support, as we're saying, to amplify and to use their position and power and platform to amplify the voices of minority and marginalized people. And I think that's an excellent point about looking within the community as well, and like whichever communities you belong to, but how you can act as an ally within those communities as well. So, kind of like cis LGBT people acting as allies towards trans people, particularly when they're being violently targeted by like media and things like that, and really kind of stepping up and kind of where you can, taking some of the brunt of those attacks, because also we understand a certain, at least, element of that kind of what that suffering can feel like, and so it's just kind of recognizing that as well, that and there's incredible power, I think, in stepping up as an ally, particularly when it's to other members of a shared community, and you kind of elevate one another altogether, and in terms of like small actions, kind of whether it's in the workplaces or yourself individually, I think as was said before, like making an effort to understand other people's experiences, and it doesn't have to be like going up to the one like trans person, the one bi person, and kind of asking them all your inappropriate questions. Don't do that. It should be, there's so much information out there. There's incredible people sharing their stories in a plethora of different ways. Using different platforms, in film, on social media, and people who are telling really incredible stories, and also just kind of telling every day-to-day stories as well. And so just making an effort to find that and to remember that this is about people when it comes down to it. And to, just really thinking about how do you want to be treated in a situation? Would you say that if somebody said something like to you, what would your response be? Why would it be any different for an LGBT person? Just remembering that at the end of the day, it comes down to human beings and the kind of community we want to create, which I should hope would be, safe, welcoming, open spaces where we can all just kind of be ourselves and try and get on, especially right now when things are so incredibly difficult already. So yeah, just being a bit conscious about that. And sorry, just a final point around making an effort to do things that aren't just for show and that aren't just like, it's like putting yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit and saying, this LGBT issue might not impact me personally, and I might not be seen to be being like a visible ally doing it, but I'm going to do it because I know it's important, and because it's important to me that we are creating these like safe, open and welcoming environments. So I'm going to take an interest in LGBT things, even if no one sees me doing it. And just because it's something that is important, and like I want to learn more, I want to understand more.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Kind of just sort of touching on the point we've all mentioned about doing things just for show. What sort of training or development programs would you like to see in employers in the near future, or expand upon training that you've already seen? Or
So yeah, we have run in my workplace a number of different awareness events as part of our PRISM employee resource group. And in fact, we've got a few going on this month. We've got one specifically for allies, just listening to the community. We've got bi-awareness, trans awareness events. And these things are really good, but they only seem to attract a limited audience sometimes. Sometimes it can be difficult to get a lot of people in. So I think in terms of sessions, you need to kind of keep on rolling these things out, and maybe trying to within the workplace and within educational establishments, almost try to I don't want to use the word force, but to try to encourage more people to get involved. Again, senior leader level, I do like this idea about reverse mentoring, where basically, and this can apply not just to the LGBT plus communities, but across to many different kind of equalities groups, where basically a senior leader just takes on board an individual who might have it could be disabled, could be LGBT plus, could be black and minority ethnic, and just listen to them and understand the issues that are reported to them, and that can act as a kind of a way of training people as well.
No, that's great. Thank you. Sorry, it's behind.
I think also it's important for workplaces to be consistent and interweave their policies and programs. I know UWE is working on a trans guidance and policy, which is fantastic. And it's the disconnect, the consistency that I have issues with. So we have these great initiatives like the trans policy and guidance. And then in terms of the degree apprenticeship for the police, that doesn't interweave, it's not intersectional. It's like saying, oh, LGBT issues on one side, and then we'll talk about Black Lives Matter as a tweet, but then we'll continue to fund an oppressive system, which is the police force. That inconsistency is an issue for me. For me, it's not rocket science. As an engineer who works with rocket scientists, it's not that complicated to be consistent and to interweave all the intersectional issues around equalities. It does take commitment and genuineness. And when these things are disassociated, I don't see the genuineness. And that's what I have been issues with when there isn't that, it's more kind of lip service rather than a genuine commitment to equality as a holistic issue, and seeing these things are connected. You can't just look at one issue on its own. We have that people who are trans, that are female, cisgender, etc. We're not single issues. And when it's a single lens taken to equality, I think that's where the inconsistency is really highlighted and the insincerity is shown. But it can be easily addressed. As I said, it's not rocket science. And I also think it's really important for workplace trainings also to recognise again that we don't all start from a level playing field of knowledge or understanding or experience, and that needs to be taken into a lot more consideration in terms of when they develop programs. And yeah, I think that, so I've done policy before. There's some very simple things, involve your stakeholders, involve the trade unions in developing programs and trainings, assess it, have measurements and resource it. And it's a cycle. So once you resource the program and you've analysed the outcomes, whether they've been good or bad, is you need to then consult on how do you improve it? How do you improve those outcomes and those changes and resource it again? And again, we're looking at where are the base levels of everyone and assess it from there. This kind of policy development and practical action has been going on through all our sectors for decades. It just needs a bit more joined up thinking, I would hope for. So that's where I feel that the training and development could be improved. I think there's some great individual initiatives, just needs to be a bit more joined up.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much for that. So
Can I?
Moving on. Oh, yes, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah. So yeah, and I fully agree with everything that's been said, particularly around approaching it from intersectional perspectives and making sure that you are really considering multiple experiences and multiple identities within how you're approaching things. And I think it's really important that you understand the intention of your training and your development and what the end goals are, and what you're trying to achieve with it, and that it isn't just about ticking boxes and things, but and that you understand what the initiatives that you run, you're really thinking about what the outcomes of those are going to be and who they're going to impact. And I think it's that especially with trainings, I try in the work that I do, most of what I do is around trainings and things like that. And I'm always trying to think about what kind of tangible action can we leave with, what particularly when you're dealing with across organizational, so if you're dealing with, perhaps junior staff who might feel that actually they don't have any power in their role, there isn't really anything they can do. They might get all the theory, but then, it doesn't really impact them. But actually, I really think it's important for people to understand that they have power, and that they can, when they leave these sessions, that they are going to do something, that it isn't just about kind of taking it in and then just sitting with it and that's it. And then the final point on that would be around focusing those that like training on the people who are most marginalized and the people who need it the most and who haven't had access to it previously, and just really making sure that we're centering those people within the work that you're doing, and so you're not kind of making decisions on behalf of people, that you are including them in decision making and in the conversations around the work that you're going to do.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Alan, can I just echo that last point? Because I thought it was a really, really well and often missed part of the equation when we think about training and development in this space. We're often thinking about, activating allies, but actually, thinking about the needs of those staff groups who are doing the work, what peer support training they might benefit from, what well-being oriented sessions they might benefit from, and just looking as well, thinking about what Tamsila was saying about the whole picture. How does the wider body of what training availability is there, how does it fit with the wider objective of the heart of why we do any of these things in general? What's the overall strategy? And I think it needs to take a multi-pronged approach.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much. So moving on to the final question for today, and it's a nice simple one for everyone. So starting with you, Yassine, how do you look after your mind, body, and soul?
Well, I mean, actually, this is a point, like the idea around kind of like valuing myself and looking after myself has been something that I've only really started properly doing in the last year or so, and that's been as a direct result of like what happened last summer with like the Black Lives Matter protests and things like that, and like explorations that I've done around my identity, particularly around race, so looking after myself has become more than just kind of like something that, like a nice bubble bath and things. It's a radical act of protest for me, because as a Black, butch, queer woman, I like society is constantly telling me that I don't deserve happiness, that I don't deserve opportunity, that I don't deserve to exist. And so like it's a real kind of, it's been a reclaiming of like my space in the world to value myself and to say like, I need a break, or I need I'm going to give myself time to meditate every morning, and that time is just for me, and I'm not thinking about anyone else or the things that I have to do that day. And so speaking of meditation, so I've put into like my daily routine like space to meditate every day, and thinking quite consciously about my what I have for breakfast and my food and meals and stuff, but in a way also where I'm kind of really consciously enjoying those things when I have them, and enjoying the fact that I am fortunate enough, especially with everything going on right now, to have like the space and time to take 10 minutes out of my day to just for myself, or to have a nice meal. So just like a lot of gratitude as well in everything that I do. And I've just been like kind of actually taking advantage of like there's loads of like workshops and talks and interesting things happening, but even like watching YouTube videos and stuff like that about topics that are of interest to me. I've just like tried to take advantage of this time as the time to like expand my knowledge and like my interests and stuff. And so I've just been quite lucky to do that, I think.
Oh, that's great. That's really positive that you're reclaiming it and you're happy now. Getting there. Yeah, it's getting there. Oh, that's great. How about you, Kaz? How do you look after your mind, body, and soul?
Well, I can only speak from my own personal experience. I'm very fortunate in that I am employed, and I've got a really good job. Not every person in the LGBT plus community is that fortunate, and so many people, in fact, do struggle to find employment. But so in terms of my mind, I'm able to keep myself busy by my work, but also by being involved in community online, and also, you know, a little bit of reading as well. I must say, in terms of my body, I must admit, during this pandemic, that's not going quite as well. I've seemed to put on quite a few pounds. I try to do some exercise every day, but it's really difficult. And I haven't really got any great advice for that one. Just to watch what you eat, basically. But in terms of soul, which, you know, I regard as well-being, I think this is an important one. You know, first of all, you know, make sure you surround yourself by good people, people that you feel comfortable with. And that's one thing I've certainly done online, in the online space during this pandemic. You know, I've joined as part of the Independent Mental Health Network, the LGBT plus steering group, and they're all like-minded people. We know we're all on the same page. I feel really comfortable in that online group, and that's been really good for my well-being. I also feel that, you know, I cannot control what's going on outside, so you kind of need to just go with the flow. And yeah, don't feel too guilty. You know, that if you end up, you know, watching some box set on the TV or whatever, you know, that's just the way it is these days. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much. How about you, Myles? How do you look after your mind, body, and soul?
Yeah, you know, with varying levels of success, I think is probably the most honest answer. You know, I'm a trier. I've got good intentions. I will often try. What did I try? Yoga and meditation. I think the main thing actually is not beating myself up when those things don't work out. I think I'm probably, you know, in the best space to look after myself when I don't become my own worst enemy. You know, if I start to internalize that voice saying, "Oh, you've not done 600 yoga sessions this year" or something like that, then, you know, it's nobody wins, I think. So actually, I think just trying, breathing, I think just really, really basic stuff that actually I could do from this exact spot. Someone said that apparently you can do chair yoga, and I mean, I'm pretty sure I could carve out 7 minutes a day, every now and then, to do some stretches. Yeah, a mixture of things, just trying, I think.
Excellent. And finally, how about you, Tamsila? How do you look after your mind, body, and soul?
Honestly, I've never been prioritising my personal care. Probably still haven't. But as I've got older, I can't ignore when I've got back issues. And this is my second time round as a co-parent. My eldest is independently living and grown up, and having a toddler again. It puts effort on my energy levels, and actually my back is really telling me when I need to do my stretches and my exercises. So I'm kind of forced to take care of my body. And in terms of my mind, I'm a bit of a nerd, and I read recently that, you know, learning new things is a really good way to reduce cognitive aging. So I keep trying to learn the new languages, which I'm terrible at, but I keep trying, and I guess that helps my mind. And in terms of my soul, I fast in Ramadan, which is a connection, I guess, between body and soul, and that's going to be upon us in a couple of months. I do daily prayers, and that's like a stretch and exercise every day for my soul. So I think that's my experience of it, which isn't necessarily the best example, but that's how I can survive so far.
No, that's fine. You do you. No one's going to judge. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. That's all the questions for today. Thank you again to everyone who's joined today, especially the panel. Like, lots of thought-provoking answers there. So thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to come up and speak for us today. I can't remember what the next step actually is, Louise.
Hi everyone. Thank you for the whole panel for just an incredible, very kind of really insightful conversation. And I think a lot of the things you've touched upon kind of really resonates. And even with curating, especially this launch program, I was very keen to kind of make sure that we as an organizations kind of really give platform voices to those stories and narratives that don't often get heard within the LGBT community. And so it's really great everything that we've heard today, because I think it just echoes just how important it is for us to bring just all the conversations that you've done kind of to the forefront of organizations. We're now going to move on to the opportunity for members of the audience to ask questions. The best way for us to do that, I feel, is either if you are comfortable to raise your hand, probably the easiest way. There's a raise hand function on Teams, and then I can go to you, or you can type your question in the chat box. Either way. Does anyone in the audience would like to ask a question to any of our speakers on relating to what they've heard today? Everyone's very okay, I was gonna say everyone's very quiet for February. I can't see your Alex. There we go. Sorry, it's taking my computer's taking a while to switch to see who's Alex, would you like to share your question with us?
Hiya. Thank you. I thought that was really brilliant. Some really great insights that also resonated with me. And I think the question I have is relating to the question of moving our activities online. And I just wondered what the panel's thoughts were on how we can, as a community, create that safe space online, and particularly thinking about how we are very restricted in what we do online because we're so reliant on a couple of organizations who kind of own these platforms that we work on, and especially things like Microsoft Teams where you can't add your pronouns, and working in spaces that are very different to meeting face to face, where perhaps you can be a bit more friendly and open about yourself. If that makes sense at all.
Is there any members of the panel that would like to take that or respond to that question?
Yeah, I'll dive in. I think, yeah, it's incredibly difficult to recreate what you would have in a face-to-face environment. But I think when I've run like workshops and things previously, or even just kind of like gatherings, firstly, in terms of like safety, it's kind of like setting that in advance. So kind of setting out what your expectations of the space are, what will be tolerated and what won't be. So I recently did an event for young people, and we kind of set out that, you know, kind of like any kind of bullying language wouldn't be allowed, but also anything that kind of, and there was kind of like clear processes to what would happen if that did occur. So like, you know, that we would take you aside and take you to a separate breakout room and just like kind of understand what happened. So people kind of know that coming into the space, you know, usually, especially if it's like with a group of like-minded people, there's unlikely to be incident, but it's kind of just saying from the very beginning, you know, we're setting this out to be a safe space, and we all agree upon entering the space to adhere to that. But then also that can really affect practical things like making sure the people you expect are going to be in the space. So like, you know, making sure that it's not just, you know, I think at the beginning of lockdown, there was incidents of people kind of troll groups like diving into workshops and things and just like spamming the chat functions and stuff with like all kind of like hateful languages and stuff. So I think, you know, safety is incredibly important because things like that can happen. But then, yeah, like just when you're in the space, I think it's just important to remember that everybody is probably in similar spaces about feeling really kind of a bit run down and maybe a little bit lonely and isolated and all the rest. And so just being really patient with everybody. If you can provide activities that people can do together. I recently played online Pictionary in a Zoom chat with people, which actually ended up going really, really well. It was kind of like an app that everybody kind of just got on and was able to draw and stuff. And it made what was at the start quite an awkward meeting really like everybody just immediately kind of relaxed. So maybe having a specific like activity that you can all do together, but that isn't going to put anybody like on the spot or make anybody feel like there's pressure on them. And those are just a few tips. I don't know if anyone else has anything.
Yeah, so yes, I'm representing Trans Pride Southwest, and we ran some online events in November. And we were very conscious of the fact that we needed to make it a safe space for everybody. I must admit, there was always the fear that people might get involved and create mischief. So I think it's really important that the organisers are on the ball and just wary of those sort of people, and be prepared to just send them out the door if necessary. But my experience of online events has actually been very positive. I haven't actually had any major issues. We ran some successful events in terms of things like a poetry night, a quiz night, drawing sessions. And okay, they're not the same as in-person events, but I've always found them to be a way of connecting with people. So I wouldn't fear them too much. Just and there are several events gone online. Bristol Pride did a quiz on Saturday evening. I think if you look out for them, don't be too fearful, and enjoy them.
Thank you, everyone, for that. There was a question in the chat that I feel like it'd be a good one to bring forwards. This question is: do you think at registration for university, students should be asked regarding their gender pronouns, and this updated each year, as currently is done with disability at the University of Bristol? Because there's real power with pronouns, and maybe even just asking them. So that's yeah. Does anyone in the panel want to take that question?
Well, obviously, if I see somebody with pronouns in their bio, to me that immediately says that person is likely to be an ally and a safe person to interact with. I've attended Zoom meetings where every single person on the call has their bios next to their name, the pronouns next to their name. But that said, I don't think as a trans person that I should be saying to everybody you need to do that. It's not essential to me, but it is a way of making people like myself feel more included. And I do kind of regard it as optional, but it's certainly a good thing for university to consider.
I think if I could briefly jump in, it'd be good to ask why. Is it part of a wider strategy? Is it something that is linked to support? Is it a potentially unfortunate attempt to do the bare minimum? I think like it has been discussed at different points on the panel. I think it just being part of a really specific strategy that has inclusion and the things that we've been discussing in mind, not just, it's a little bit, it's a little bit like the idea of taking down a statue without engaging with racism or the topic of it, or why in the first place that might be an issue. So I think it would just be good to move beyond the action and to have an actual strategy in place, not just the thing itself.
Thank you for that. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to ask any questions? I'm mindful that we have about 5 more minutes left of our time together, and also do be mindful in terms of taking the time to complete our engagement survey, which is a very helpful thing for us to improve our programme in the future. I will pass on to Hannah. I think Hannah, you put your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I want to echo everyone else's thoughts about really being a great panel and really great things to think about that I'm certainly going to take away from today. And I just wanted to know, since it's LGBT History Month, if there was a historical or perhaps, I say historical, not from years and years ago, maybe more current person or a group or organization that you wanted to kind of highlight and bring that you think more people should know about. Because yeah, I think it's really, as you said, important to do your own research. So I'd love to know your thoughts on any people that you want, more people to know about.
Thank you for that question, Hannah. Does anyone of the panel want to take that question?
I might just briefly say a book I'm looking forward to reading this year is by Sean Fay, a journalist. And that would be a wonderful thing if someone wanted to go away and pre-order something and have something to sort of read and learn about. That'd be someone who I'd probably profile, but it'd be good to hear who else other people would.
Yeah, I would echo reading a book. I've started reading Michael Cashman's book. I'm only on the first few chapters, so I can't make too many comments about it, but I know it's an excellent book. But if you wanted to know more about trans history, Christine Burns, I think it's something like Trans Britain. It's almost like the encyclopedia of trans history, and it covers things like the need for the Gender Recognition Act and the campaign that she did for using with a organisation called Press for Change. And it's a really good book to learn about trans people.
I would recommend Black on Both Sides, which is a book. It's a racial history of trans identity, and it's just like fascinating how much history that like you literally would never. There's no other way of finding out about it. It's been either deliberately lost and hidden, or it's just from cultures where things weren't written down or valued in the same way by colonial systems and stuff. So that's really fascinating. And there's a particular person that's spoken about in there called William Dorsey Swan, I believe. William Dorsey Swan, who was an ex-slave who had kind of, I guess we would call them similar to like drag balls now, and attended by plentiful other ex-slaves in the United States, and turn the century kind of just before, and it's just like this. Again, when we say that queer and trans histories, and people want to say that it's modern, like something that's just happening now because we're too liberal or whatever it is, this goes back, and these people have existed and identities have existed over time, and it's so important to reflect on that and to learn about it.
I would like to profile Dai Abdullah. He's a Black imam in the US that has worked in Islam, queer politics and Islam, Muslims for many decades. And he's just got a book out coming this month. Last month, actually, it's just come out. So I haven't read it yet. I've got it on pre-order. But I know his work, and he's been fantastic for queer Muslims across the globe. And outside of the Northern Hemisphere, Ghazala Anwar, who's based in Pakistan, has done some great work on queer Muslim women and her theology work. I really recommend and would support people, look at, queer people from Muslim communities when they're looking for those voices rather than necessarily external voices speaking on behalf of us. I think that's really important to hear the authentic voices that have worked in our own communities. And I will put a link to Dai Abdullah for spelling for many people.
Thank you so much, everyone, for just for giving your time, your emotional energy, and just the insight in terms of everything you've brought today in terms of the panel. I'm very keen on trying to keep the time to meetings and events, because I know how energy levels, different time commitments, all those kind of things. So I just wanted to check whether anyone had any final questions they would like to ask the panel before we close, and then also a reminder to take the time to complete our engagement survey. So is there anyone, if you want to raise your hand if you have any questions, and if you don't, then it's also fine too.
Just to fill in the silence a bit quickly, I'd like to say a big thank you to Louise for organising this event and getting everyone involved and keeping us all motivated to get to this point to generate this event. So thank you very much, Louise, for setting this up for us.
Absolute pleasure. I don't think we have any other questions. So, which means that we kind of end beautifully on time. A slight apology for at the beginning for the technical challenges. This is very the current modern age where we have to all grasp like digital things. But just thank you again, everyone, for coming. Thank you especially to our speakers, and thank you to Alan for hosting the panel, and thank you to our executive speakers as well. There will be a recording of the event shared in the next few weeks that you can rewatch and share within your networks and friends. I do encourage that you continue these conversations beyond LGBT History Month, that you have it within your friends and families, really important as well in this current time, and especially with the message of being an ally is absolutely critical, important, especially even though we're not physically together, we can still demonstrate allyship in how we talk, in who we read, like how we educate ourselves. So do remain open and just interested within like learning more about LGBT plus inclusion. On that front, I thank everyone for your attendance, and if you do have any questions, do either email myself directly, louise.gaux@ue.ac.uk, or if you want to email the generic diversity team, it's edi@ue.ac.uk if you need to ask any further questions about today or the rest of the LGBT History Month programme. So thank you very much, everyone, and I will hopefully see you at another event in the near future. And do engage with the rest of the programme, both at UE, at the University of Bristol, and within our local city and globally, of course. Thank you, and I will see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.